I'm Elizabeth, a literary princess, and today we are talking about Twilight. As some of you may know, I decided to reread the Twilight Saga in June because reasons? No good reason, really, I just did. And I have a lot of thoughts about this. So, first, I want to start off with my history with this series, and then I'm going to talk about each book individually and kind of my feelings on reading these as an adult compared to how I remember feeling about them as a teenager. Of course, I don't have videos or a diary or anything to look back on to see what I thought when I was a teenager, so I'm just going based on my memories. But I think even though it's been way too long, a really long time, we're not going to talk about it, I think I remember pretty well. So let's jump in. I first read Twilight in 2007, my freshman year of high school. At this point, the first 3 books in the series were out, and I immediately became obsessed with them. I was what you might refer to as a twihard. Yeah, so I reread the books multiple times. I was bribing my high school boyfriend into reading the books because I felt that he should read them to be able to understand me. I had Twilight jewelry, one of which I am currently wearing. I pulled this absolute relic out of storage for you all. It says, "I dream about being with you forever." My high school boyfriend bought this for me at Hot Topic circa 2008, 2009. I wore it a lot. It's what I'm wearing in my junior year school photos, I believe. And frankly, this is super uncomfortable. Like, my neck is sweating from wearing this. I don't know how I wore this as often as I did, but I did. I also had Alice Cullen's necklace from the movies. I don't know what happened to that though. I probably would have preferred to wear that over this for the video, but I knew where this was. I didn't know where that one was, if it is still even in my parents' house. So yeah. And then Breaking Dawn came out on August 2nd, 2008, which happens to be my birthday. It was my 15th birthday. So naturally, my party that year was going to the midnight release. I've got a nice little picture for proof here. So, what I am trying to say is I really loved Twilight. But how does it hold up reading it as an adult? I am now almost 30. That birthday is coming around pretty soon. So, how does it compare from when I was 14 to now as a nearly 30-year-old woman? Let's talk about it. If you don't know, Twilight is the story of Bella Swan. She moves to Forks, Washington to live with her father, where she meets a coven of vampires and falls in love with Edward Cullen, who is this sexy, broody, permanently 17-year-old vampire. And naturally, Bella wants to become a vampire so they can be together forever. And a lot of stuff happens along the way. There are going to be spoilers in this video. This is almost a 20-year-old series, so I feel like that shouldn't really matter. But there will be spoilers for the books as well as the movies. Just warning you. So, Twilight. Now, this is a little bit different from the other 3 books in the series because I have actually read this as an adult a few different times. Twilight is weirdly a comfort read for me. So when I lived abroad for a year, it lined up with when the 10-year anniversary of Twilight happened, and Stephenie Meyer released a gender-bent version of the story called Life and Death. And it was released in a bind-up with the original novel. So I bought that and read it because I was depressed and sad and homesick. And I reread it 2 more times, once again when I was super depressed, and then another time when Midnight Sun was released, because obviously I needed to be able to compare them. Yes, I might have pre-ordered Midnight Sun. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. So I've encountered this book as an adult before. So my feelings on this book I already knew had changed quite a bit from when I was 14. I mean, at 14, I thought that this was the pinnacle of romance, the love story of the ages. I thought Edward Cullen was so sexy and romantic. I thought Bella Swan was so lucky. I thought she was so relatable. I wanted to be her. These feelings did not quite carry over as an adult, and they definitely did not for this read around. This read around, I actually found myself really focusing on some of the aspects that I did not like about this, to the point where I almost started tabbing them, but I decided I didn't want to waste my time or my tabs. What did I notice? First of all, Bella Swan, the character who I was like, she's so relatable, I want to be her. She's really not much of a character at all. So, and Stephenie Meyer has actually said this in her FAQs on her website, stephaniemeyer.com. Yes, I have read all the FAQs. I have read all the extra material. Leave me alone. It was in high school. Leave me alone. I might have looked at some of it to do this video. It's fine. Anyway, Stephenie Meyer has said that she kind of made Bella as a blank slate character so that the reader could project themselves onto her and imagine themselves in the role of Bella Swan. So that is why she is not physically described very much in the books. Her personality is minimal, let's say. She likes reading. She likes classic literature. So naturally, as a teenager, I was like, I love reading in classic literature. She's so relatable. She's a bit sarcastic. I was sarcastic as a teenager. She's so relatable. But her main character trait is really that she's clumsy, which isn't a character trait unless you're in The Sims. But as a clumsy 14-year-old, I was like, oh my God, she's so relatable. And yes, I am kind of making fun of my teenage self here, but I also don't really blame my teenage self for liking these books as much as I did. I can see where teenage me would have been totally into this. I get it, but I am poking fun at young Elizabeth a little bit. Anyway, I will say that Bella has more character in this book than she does in the other 3 books combined. And we will talk about that, kind of the downfall of Bella Swan's character, as thin as it was already. But even that, as an adult, I can forgive that, whatever, it's fine. Sure, I can project onto her. Cool. My big problem in this book is Edward Cullen himself. Broody, sexy, and his only other personality traits are controlling and abusive. Yes, abusive. This man is manipulative. He is physically abusive on occasion. There's actually a scene in this book where they're not even dating yet. They are not even dating yet, okay? And this happens. Bella passes out doing blood testing in biology, and everyone decides it's best for Bella to go home. Edward's like, I'll drive you home. She's like, no, I can do it myself. Starts to walk toward her truck. He physically grabs the hood of her sweatshirt and drags her across the parking lot to his car. On what planet is that okay? No planet. That is the answer. No, on no planet is that okay. And yet that's portrayed as being perfectly fine. A-okay. Never mind the fact that he breaks into her room and watches her sleep. it's just not great. He is abusive and controlling. He forces her to go to prom when she doesn't want to. And honestly, his whole family is kind of like this to her throughout the series. They don't tell her things that she kind of needs to know. His sister Alice kind of treats her like a doll to just dress up however she wants, even though Bella doesn't like dressing up or fashion or anything. Oh my God, there's multiple times in this book where various vampires pick her up to like run with her and don't even ask if they can. But then Alice at one point asks, "Is it okay if I pick you up?" And Bella goes, "You're the only one that's ever asked." And that's just like this whole series in a nutshell. It's so depressing. Oh yeah, issues of consent, abusive relationships. And as I was reading this, I was so concerned for teenage Elizabeth because she's over here back in 2007 like, this is the pinnacle of romance. This is the love story of the ages. I want a guy like Edward. No, girl, no you don't. No. So I'm like, oh boy, yikes, yikes. So that was not a great feeling as I was reading this. And yet, I still had a ton of fun here. Is that hypocritical? Maybe. Do I care? Despite the fact that, yes, this relationship is abusive and awful, this book does capture that feeling of first high school love really well. And even as an almost 30-year-old woman who's been married for a year and is in a very healthy relationship, I was drawn in. I was like, oh, that first exciting. It made me feel like a teenager again, just falling in love. So I will give Meyer props for that. The plot itself is pretty good. It's exciting, it's fun. The writing is not great, but I've read worse. So really, the only thing that was keeping this from being a 4-star read for me was Edward's behavior, because he was so abusive, but yet we're not supposed to view it as abuse. Like, it would be one thing if she was trying to make a point about abusive relationships, because there are plenty of young adult books that do that. That's not what's happening here. This is portrayed as like a great relationship. Like, again, the romance of the ages. As he's dragging her across the parking lot by her sweatshirt. So, yeah, I had to give it 3 stars because I was like, I'm not comfortable with this, even though I'm having a really good time. I will say, this is my favorite book of the series. Like, honestly, it just kind of starts to go downhill from this point on. I do like the next 2 books in the series. We'll get to the 4th one. But this is definitely my favorite of the series. I think I can see myself rereading it again. New Moon. So, controversial opinion. This was actually my favorite in the series as a teenager. And that is because of one reason and one reason alone, and his name is Jacob Black. So, Jacob is a boy from the Quileute Reservation in La Push. He is the son of Bella's father's best friend, and he is head over heels for Bella. It also turns out he is a werewolf. So, is part of why I liked him so much that he was a werewolf and I was big on wolves as a teenager? Yes. Yes, it was. But also, his personality in this book is just so great. We do meet him in Twilight, and he's pretty cute there too. But we really get to see a build-up of their relationship here. Jacob is a sweetheart. He's happy-go-lucky. He's always up for something fun. He likes to work on cars. He's just the total boy next door. So when you compare this relationship to Bella's relationship with Edward, honestly, even as a teenager, I was Team Jacob. I had a Team Jacob shirt. I don't know if I should admit that, but I am. So, we also get even more of Edward being awful in this book, even though he's not even in it for like half of it. Edward decides that he is too dangerous for Bella to be around, and therefore decides to up and leave with his entire family, which causes Bella to go into this very deep depression for several months. So, I actually will say I like some parts of how Bella's depression is portrayed in here, and I will show you what I mean. So the months of her depression are just portrayed as these blank pages with the month, because she is so numb that she is just like not interacting with the world or really aware of anything. I think that's really well done. That is what depression feels like. I will say that is what depression feels like. However, with Bella's depression, we also get the erasure of her personality. Like, gone is any semblance of a character that she had. She is just now a person. Like, she's there. That sarcasm starts to go away, and it never comes back. Like, she just, all pretense of her being like an actual character are gone with this depression. And that is because she has based so much of her identity around Edward. Her inner monologue is so difficult in this book. It is a first-person narrative, they all are. But she is just like, my life is over without Edward. I am nothing without him. And it's just like, it's pretty yikes. And it's never really combated. Like, can depression feel that way? Absolutely. There is nothing in this book that gives any indication that her feeling like that means that relationship was toxic and unhealthy. In fact, at the end, he comes back and they get back together. So, yikes. It's not great. And then, just a side note, the fact that Edward's family just all goes along with this, like, they all have lives here, okay? His foster father, Carlisle, is a doctor. Like, they have jobs. Some of them are still in school. And they're just all like, yes, this is a completely reasonable idea to just up and run away in a matter of 24 hours. No? Did anybody think about anything? Be normal people. No, people don't react that way. And honestly, I think this might be because they seem to all be stuck at the age they were when they become vampires. I don't think Stephanie Meyer meant that to be this way. I think that they're all supposed to be like very mature and so wise and intelligent. But Edward seems stuck at the age of 17. Only a 17-year-old would think the way to handle a breakup is by running away forever. And only other teenagers or people in their early 20s would go along with that. Like, that's not something a 35-year-old is going to be like, ah, yes, I shall completely and entirely help you with that. No, they're going to be like, no, we need to sit down and we need to have a conversation because this is ridiculous. It's a teenage mindset. So I really do think that they are stuck at the age they were when they became vampires, but that is never actually addressed in this book. And we're going to see more of his impulsive teenage ness in this book. Jacob and Bella become close because he is helping pull her out of her depression. And naturally, there are feelings that begin to develop between the two of them. Bella doesn't want to admit it because she feels like she needs to be loyal to Edward, even though he dumped her, which makes no sense, but fine. Jacob obviously really likes her. And this is going to become kind of one of the main conflicts of the next book, Eclipse. Before we move on to that, I do want to discuss Stephenie Meyer's use of the Quileute tribe, because they are a real Native American tribe that live on the reservation in La Push, Washington. And Stephenie Meyer completely makes up legends for them and their history and uses them for her supernatural vampire werewolf romance. And it's pretty uncomfortable. Like, we want to talk about appropriation. I think that is the clearest example I can give of it. She just takes their name and their location and makes up all this stuff. She got a best-selling series out of it, and she did not give any money to the tribe for the use of their name or any of that. They received no compensation for that. So that is something about this series that is very uncomfortable. You can, in fact, go to the Quileute tribe's website and learn about their actual history and folklore, and it's very interesting. I highly recommend it. But that is something to always be aware of with this series. It leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So, New Moon, my favorite as a teenager because Jacob Black. And you know what? I stand by that. That Jacob Black is a better choice, at least in this book. And you know what? He looked hot as Taylor Lautner, or Taylor Lautner looked hot as Jacob running around shirtless in the movies, and I stand by that completely. I gave this 3 stars as well. I was thinking about 3.5, but I decided 3. We're just gonna go with 3 for all of these except one, and we'll get to that one. This is definitely not my favorite anymore. Like I said, the first book is my favorite now as an adult. I still really enjoy Jacob, but this book does not capture quite the same feelings as the first book does. Probably because Bella is just depressed and a mess through most of it. Who wants to sit around and listen to her be like, my life is over because the guy dumped me? No. Oh, I did want to talk about one more thing before we move on to Eclipse. Sorry. Edward and his stuck at 17-ness. Bella goes cliff diving at one point and nearly dies. Edward's sister Alice can see visions of the future. She sees Bella jump off the cliff and die. Now, Bella is saved by Jacob, but because Alice cannot see the werewolves in her visions, Alice is just under the impression she's dead. Word gets to Edward, and Edward decides he is going to take his own life by provoking the Volturi into killing him. The Volturi are these Italian vampire royalty kind of thing. They are like the law and justice of the vampire world. So he goes and does that, and Bella has to go save him and be like, no, I'm alive, don't do that. This is based on Romeo and Juliet. Each Twilight book has a piece or two of classic literature that it draws on. It's Pride and Prejudice for Twilight. It's Romeo and Juliet for here. It's Wuthering Heights for the third book. But again, like, that's something a teenager would do. First of all, I think that this girl I'm in love with is dead, so I'm gonna die as well. That is teenager thinking right there. And again, it's never really combated too much. Like, we're never like, oh yes, that was a completely unreasonable thing that he did there within the book. It's just like, yeah, of course he did that. I'm like, that's not great. That's not great. That's not great. We'll also see, in terms of plot, this one is probably the weaker of the first three books. We're not, fourth book. Can you tell that I don't like the fourth book yet? We'll get to it though. But yes, 3 stars. I did not like it as much as when I was a teenager, but I still had a really good time. I still really liked Jacob. Eclipse, or as I like to call it, the character assassination of Jacob Black. Because Edward is back now, and him and Bella are back together. But when you compare her relationship with Edward, remember, guy that's dragging her by the hood of her sweatshirt across a parking lot, compared with Jacob, who is just like a sweetheart and wants her to be happy, and is like, yeah, sure, I'll help you fix up these motorcycles so that you can learn to ride a motorcycle. I don't know why you want to do that, but sure, I'll help you. And who is just like an absolute sweetheart and trying to make her happy. I mean, the choice is obvious, right? So we can't have that here in Stephenie Meyer world, because Edward and Bella are the romance of the ages, the pinnacle of love stories. So what do? We make Jacob look awful. In this book, Jacob becomes so manipulative and possessive. He is just as possessive as Edward. And I mean, Edward's really bad in this. He gets even more controlling and abusive because he doesn't want her to see Jacob. He's like, werewolves are dangerous. You can't go see him. He sabotages her truck at one point because she's thinking about going to see Jacob. He sabotages her truck and is like, you can have it back when you're making better decisions. Boy, I'd be sabotaging you and your face. So yeah, Edward, even worse than he was before. But Jacob becomes just as bad. He is manipulative. He kisses Bella without her consent at one point. She does punch him in the face, which breaks her hand because he's a werewolf, but at least she's like, this isn't cool, and punches him. And he does apologize for it, but then later in the book, he manipulates her into kissing him. He becomes so awful, just as bad as Edward. And I'm like, wow, our good choice. Suddenly you killed him. You killed him. So that pissed me off, naturally. The actual plot of this book is pretty good. It's dealing with this vampire Victoria who's trying to kill Bella because Edward killed her mate James, who was also trying to kill Bella. So I don't really know if you can be that mad about it, lady, but sure. The plot itself is exciting. It's a better plot than New Moon. I will give it that. However, it is so damn long. Look at this. This is, how many pages is this? This is just over 600 pages. And like, it just seems to go on forever. And it takes place over a really short amount of time. They're like at the end of their senior year in this book. And it just goes on and on. They graduate like halfway through and there's still half a book left. I was like, how are we not done here? And I think that was actually one of the biggest flaws of the whole series, because I felt like that with every single book. And I mean, they're not actually as long as they seem. They have large type, they have wide margins. But even still, it was like, oh my God, can we get on? The first book is almost 500 pages, and they just get longer from there. So I will say, and I noticed it in the first two, it really was noticeable here. One thing I also really like about this book is that we get some of the other characters' backstories. So we learn about Edward's siblings, Rosalie and Jasper, and their backstories, which are super interesting. And while I like this leads to another flaw of the series, and that is that all of the side characters are incredibly interesting people and have really interesting stories, and yet we're stuck here with Bella and Edward. And even Edward has an interesting backstory. Back when he was a young vampire, he decided to go off of their vegetarian diet of eating animals and murder people, but he would only kill bad people, like people who were predators and serial killers and that type of thing, because he can hear their thoughts. So like, that's super interesting. I'd read a book about a vampire doing that. Rosalie is attacked and killed by her fiance and several of his friends, and Carlisle finds her and turns her into a vampire. She proceeds to get revenge on these guys by like hunting them down, and the finale is her bursting into where her ex-fiance is hiding, wearing a blood-covered wedding dress. Girl, queen. I'd read a book about that. Jasper was created during the Civil War, and we get to see this history about vampires during the Civil War having territory disputes. Really interesting. And yet I'm stuck here with frigging Bella with no personality. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So I love learning about the other vampires, but it does point out a very big flaw in these books, that we are following the dullest character in the entire universe of this series. So, at the end of this book, we get Edward manipulating Bella into agreeing to marry him, because she wants to become a vampire after graduation, and she is insistent that they do it before she turns 19, because she's already a year older than Edward, and that's unacceptable. There's a lot of weird ageism in this series, like, oh my God, I'm 18, I'm so old. I'm like, girl, no. Like, I get that if your partner is 17 forever, you don't want to be too old in comparison, but the way that this series treats aging is so weird. And I feel like it could very easily give people a complex, like young, impressionable teenagers reading this. I don't know. But, so Edward's whole thing is, I won't turn you into a vampire unless you marry me first. And Bella, even though she's completely ready to become immortal at 18, is like, marriage? What am I, a child bride? I'm like, yes, basically. But she's terrified of marriage because her parents are divorced. So this is a whole big thing. She ultimately says yes because she wants him to turn her into a vampire. It's so manipulative and it's so irritating. I hate it. Anyway, this book got 3 stars from me as well. Again, I had a good time. I like the characters' backstories. The plot is exciting. I could do without the character assassination of Jacob Black, but you know. And it's way too long, but I still had fun. And now, Breaking Dawn, released on my 15th birthday. Stayed up all night for the midnight release party. As soon as I got back home, I got into bed and started reading it. And goddamn was I disappointed. This book is a mess. So Bella and Edward get married, and you know what? The wedding is great. Like, I love a good wedding scene. I love a good wedding in general. Loved it. It was beautiful. Wonderful. Great job. After that, whoo, down the hill we go. And Edward continues to be his awful self. He does one final sabotage on Bella's car so that he can buy her a new one that has missile-proof glass or something stupid as a joke about, haha, you always get yourself into danger. No. They get married, they go on their honeymoon, they have sex for the first time, and Bella immediately becomes pregnant. But wait, you say, he's a vampire. He can't get people pregnant. Apparently he can. There is no real explanation for this in the book. They're all kind of just like, whoa, we didn't know that could happen. Stephenie Meyer gives an explanation for it on her website. It's bad. It still doesn't make sense. It's just, no. And this pregnancy nearly kills Bella because this half vampire baby is extremely fast growing and it is just sucking the life out of her rapidly. It is breaking her bones when it tries to move. She's dying actively before her eyes, and she will not let them end the pregnancy. So Stephenie Meyer is a member of the Mormon Church, I believe. And the pro-abstinence message is pretty clear in Eclipse, but her religious beliefs really seep into this book. The very strong anti-abortion message, even when the mother is literally at death's door, and she tells Edward that he should save the baby over her during the birth process. Yeah, and then there's the fact that they get married, they have sex for the first time, they immediately become pregnant. And of course, they had to get married at 18 because abstinence. So I worry very much about the message that this was sending to young girls. And now, I'm religious myself. So like, I don't have a problem with religion getting portrayed in books or with an author's religious beliefs having an effect on the material of their books. What I have a problem with is that the way it's done in this book sends such a toxic message to young women. Like this, yeah, get married at 18 because you can't have sex otherwise, and even if your pregnancy is literally killing you, you shouldn't end the pregnancy. And now, I'm not getting into politics on here, I don't do that, but I think there's some dangerous messaging in this book, and it's pretty uncomfortable. And somehow things just get worse from here. How, you say? How can we get worse than the vampire somehow impregnating somebody and the pregnancy slowly killing the mother? Their child is a little girl. They name her Renesmee. Yes, it's a terrible name. It's a mashup of their mother's names, Esme and Renee. Yes, someone should be shot for that. We're not even gonna. The real problem here is Jacob. So the werewolves have this thing called imprinting. And it's like kind of a love at first sight deal. So after they've transformed into a werewolf for the first time, if they see the person they're going to imprint on, all of a sudden their whole world starts to revolve around that person. It's like a soulmate kind of deal. And fine. That got introduced, I think, in New Moon. And I was like, yeah, all right, I've read fan fiction. I can deal with one true mate stuff. I don't care, whatever. When I do care is when Jacob imprints on a newborn baby. And he's not even the only werewolf to imprint on a literal child, because in Eclipse, one of his friends imprints on a 2-year-old. And Stephenie Meyer's like, no, it's not that way. He'll be like an older brother to her, the best older brother ever, and a friend. But then, once she's grown up, why wouldn't she want to be with him? Because he's perfect for her. Ma'am, that's called grooming. So many red flags. Yikes! Okay, yikes. I can't believe this made it through her editors. Why was there nobody being like, Stephenie, no, we can't do that. No. I mean, I feel like I don't even have to say anything else. That is so egregious and so bad. And you know what? Even as a teenager who was in love with this series, I was like, damn, that's bad. And as soon as I finished this book, I started writing a fan fiction of what Breaking Dawn should have been, which did not involve any half-vampire children or imprinting on them. Thank you very much. And was it good? No. Did I finish it? No. Was it better than this book? Yes. I can confidently say 15-year-old Elizabeth wrote a better story than Stephenie Meyer did here. This also causes, even if we ignore that, which we shouldn't, but even if we ignore that, this is so weird, considering that Jacob was in love with Bella, and Bella admits in Eclipse that A, she's in love with Jacob as well, and B, if there had been a world with no vampires and no werewolves and no magic at all, Jacob was her soulmate. So this bitch is out here getting 2 soulmates, a vampire one and a human one. But also, if he's her soulmate, what, he's imprinting on her daughter? And so Stephenie Meyer like reneges on this thing that she already established, that Jacob is Bella's human soulmate. And is like, well, actually, the reason they were so drawn together is because of Renesmee and how he'd imprint on Renesmee. I was like, ma'am, no. So yeah, the only reason that they were so drawn together was because this previously non-existent baby was his soulmate. Can you see my soul leaving my body? Because I feel like it is right now. This is so bad. This is so bad. Oh my God. And there's one point, Like, they get upset about it at first. Bella yells at him. Edward's uncomfortable with it. But by the end, they are all just like, oh yes, of course, Jacob and Renesmee will be together when she's old enough. Edward actually says to him, it's like, my brother, no, my son. Ew! 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 No! No! So much no. So much no. The ending of this book also sucks. Honestly, the whole book is mostly just absolute crap. But, so the Volturi find out that the Cullens have this child that seems to be a vampire child, which is illegal to do in their world. So they're coming to destroy the whole coven. And so the Cullens gather up witnesses, and like, honestly, it's leading toward a fight where like, we're gonna get a showdown. We have all these vampires with different cool powers who can cause people to be in pain by just looking at them, or can friggin' manipulate elements, and I don't even know what else. Like, we're gearing toward a fight, okay? And like, we're really gearing. It's a build up. And it ends by them talking about it. Like, they talk it out. And like, there's some mind kind of stuff going on because Bella is able to shield people with her new vampire powers. So like, there's a little bit of mind stuff going on, but mostly they're just talking. And it is the world's biggest letdown. Like, so much so that for the movie, Breaking Dawn Part 2, because for some reason they broke this into 2 movies. It did not need to be. But they actually added the fight scene. And then we're like, oh, it's one of Alice's visions. This is what would have happened if they fought. And that's what convinces the Volturi to back off, because they saw that they all would have died. So, you know what? I think the movie actually did a really good job there, because this book is so anticlimactic. It's like, I read almost 800 pages, this thing is. All this buildup, I had to deal with some utter bullshittery about half vampire babies and basically grown-ass men imprinting on them. And that's what you give me? That? Really? Where were her editors? Because they were clearly not doing their jobs. And so some of these problems with this book come from the fact that in Stephenie Meyer's original conception of Twilight, it was only 2 books. It was Twilight and then a book called Forever Dawn, which basically was Breaking Dawn with some changes. So the whole half vampire baby was still there, as was Jacob imprinting. So some of the reason this book sucks is just because her ideas are bad. But in the original conception, New Moon and Eclipse did not exist. There was no love triangle. There was not this whole thing about Jacob being Bella's human soulmate. So she didn't adjust accordingly for how the series had grown. And it causes problems. But the other part is just that her ideas are bad. Like, this is just bad. Wow, it would have been bad even if it was just the direct sequel to Twilight. Damn. Yeah, as you can tell, I did not rate this book very high. I gave this 1.5 stars. Why not 1 star, you say? The half star is for the fact that somehow, despite it, I still had kind of a good time when I could ignore the utter bullshittery, which is hard to do because it's just ingrained in the plot. But some of the witnesses they're gathering up, these other vampires that we had never met before, are incredibly interesting. They give us this look into the vampire world of Twilight that we haven't had before, because we've really only met the Cullens, the Volturi, and a few other random vampires. So now we're seeing Romanian vampires who have a huge rivalry with the Volturi. We're seeing these 3 actually Amazon vampires who I swear to God are a polyamorous lesbian relationship, because that is how they act, except Stephenie Meyer would never actually do that, because there's also some weird homophobia in this book. So I think she just didn't realize she wrote it like that. But okay. We get vampires from Egypt, vampires from England. We get all these super interesting people. And I'm like, wow, I would love to know some of their backstories. And they all have these super cool powers. And we're still stuck with Bella. So the half star is for what could have been. Because if her editors had just had the guts to say, Stephenie, no, go back to the drawing board. This is, in fact, not how to do this series. You can't do that. It is actively bad. We could have had something okay. And yet we didn't. So, Breaking Dawn. 1.5 stars. So, what is my ultimate consensus on rereading the Twilight Saga as an adult? I did have a really good time. It was nostalgic, it was fun, especially the first 3 books were just a good time. And honestly, I could see myself rereading the first 3 books again. Breaking Dawn, I never want to have to read that trash again in my life. I can't believe that I've read it twice now. It was really bad. Never want to read that again. But I can see myself rereading the first 3. Definitely can see myself rereading the first one, as I have done that several times as an adult already. I am, however, very concerned with the messaging that teenage Elizabeth and the other teenagers who grew up with Twilight were receiving. And now, I'm not somebody who thinks that books have to portray good, moral, upright characters all the time. Love a good morally gray character. Love a good just straight up evil character. I'm fine with the good guys not winning. I'm fine with violence and bad stuff being portrayed in books. Like, I'm not one of those people that's like, the author portrayed it in the book, so they must condone it. Like, I don't believe that. My issue with the way that Twilight is set up is that Stephenie Meyer wants us to view Bella and Edward's relationship as peak romance, as the best of the best, the love story of the ages. We're not supposed to view it as abusive. But it has all the indicators of an abusive relationship. Like, I will never get him dragging her by the hood of her sweatshirt. I would punch my husband if he did that to me. Unacceptable. So for that to be being shown to teenagers as this is what you should aspire toward is so dangerous. I'm like kind of looking back on my life and like, wow, you know, there's some things here that make a lot of sense because this is what I was being told and here's what was happening. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's not great. So I would never in a million years recommend this to a teenager. I don't really think I would recommend them to anybody. I think if you were a teenager and loved the Twilight Saga, it might be fun to reread them the way I have. But I would never just suggest for someone to go read the Twilight series. I wouldn't do it. Am I keeping the books? Because in my fantasy shelf tour, I said maybe I'll reread them and then decide to unhaul them. I'm not unhauling them, not even Breaking Dawn, even though it's bad. I'm not unhauling them though, because they were a very special part of my life as a teenager. And I can foresee myself wanting to reread the first 3 again. So I will not be getting rid of them. I also have Midnight Sun, which was released in 2020. It is Twilight from Edward's perspective. And I chose not to include that in this video. I haven't read it either since reading it when it first came out. I chose not to include it because I really just wanted to talk about the series as it was when it originally came out. I might reread Midnight Sun at some point and do like a kind of compare it to Twilight and see how it changes how I view things in Twilight, if it does at all. Edward was so damn whiny. Oh my god. I thought that being in Bella's head during New Moon was bad. He is so self-hating and so dramatic. Being in his head was kind of rough. I'm like, I don't really know if I want to reread it. But if that is something that would interest you, please let me know down in the comments below and I will definitely think about it. So, I would love to hear from you all. Have you read Twilight? Did you read it as a teenager or as an adult? And what did you think of it? It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.